Started. Again, I'm Brian. Just as a quick introduction, my background here, a lot of Holacracy first kind of incubated in a software company that I started back in 2001 and built and grew for many years. And that company, unlike a lot of entrepreneurs, I started that company to be a laboratory. I started that company with just a burning drive to find a better way of working together. Yeah, I just had this deep sense that there's just got to be a better way to integrate, to share a workspace towards a purpose, and figure out how we all are going to work together, expect things from each other, get work done together. And I didn't know what the better way was, but I thought, you know what, I want to find one. Let's start a company, and what better way to explore that question than to experiment? So over the many years that followed, we would try any new leading edge idea, thought, practice, technique, theory, anything we could find that seemed to help express some new capacity for organization. And we'd figure out how to integrate it somehow into the way things worked at our software company. And over the years that followed, we learned a lot of things, including a lot of ways not to do it. We learned a lot of bad ideas. One of my favorite quotes from Thomas Edison: "I didn't fail, I just learned 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb." Well, we learned 1,000 ways not to run a company differently, and over the years, maybe one or two that actually seemed to work. And what followed was a new system emerging, something we later called Holacracy. And now about 6 years ago, I left my software company, and we started Holacracy One, which is the company that brings me here today. And Holacracy One was created to take this emerging new method that was kind of pioneered in actual practice in my software company, and to spread it to the world. So we're out there doing webinars like this, trainings, and a lot of consulting work with a lot of different clients. And we have a licensing program. We're helping other consultants all over the world figure out how to use this method and bring it to their clients. And since then, it's been spreading quite nicely in the past 5 years, especially in the past 2 or 3, as we've seen more and more organizations starting to shift their operating system, if you will, to run with this new method. So let me give you a taste of it as we go. And let me start by asking you all a question, and I'll invite you to just share your thoughts in the chat box. So whatever comes to mind, type into the chat box for me, just quick words or phrases. What do you think of when you think of the challenges we face in organizations today that just keep coming up in all different types of organizations, the endemic challenges that plague us, that limit us? And just type in, again, whatever word or phrase pops to mind when you think of the challenges that we struggle with in organizations that seem to just keep coming up or limiting or plaguing us. And I'm going to read some of the ones coming up. Inability to adapt quickly, the pace, the communication challenges. What organization doesn't have some of them? Politics and ego, for sure. Too rigid, absolutely. Psychopaths at the sea level. Yeah, I've seen some of that too, though. It almost seems something about the systems tends to either breed or find that at the sea level. Sometimes, not always. Linearity, coordination challenges, divisiveness, complexity, increasing complexity, and the need for simplicity amidst that. Yeah, definitely. What else? Let's see. Lack of creativity. No good response system, difficulty responding to reality. See, what else? Funding challenges, sure. Genuine dialogue, challenges with that. Hierarchy, limiting everything, yep. Lack of collaboration, power struggles, power issues. Rapidly changing environment, people, teams, going with what we saw later, an inability to adapt to change, or earlier. Competition instead of cooperation, just overwhelm, processing loads of info, and the departmental silos that come up, absolutely. No patience, wanting everything now, definitely. Sometimes needing everything now, and things move a little too slowly. So the interesting thing to me, I ask this question all the time in the start of all of my presentations, and the funny thing is I get the same answers again and again and again. You guys named probably half of these at least. This is not a complete list. There are many, many more, as many surfaced here. But the things you guys typed are very familiar. I've seen the same things again and again and again. What organization around today doesn't suffer from some of these issues? I think almost all organizations suffer from all of these at least some of the time, and maybe some of these all of the time. Um, so in that, I think that's really interesting. It's certainly not a lack of awareness that is the root of this problem, because again, it doesn't matter where I go, anywhere in the world, in any different culture, any type of group, whether I'm talking to C-level executives or people just working in companies, nonprofit, for-profit, doesn't matter. I hear the same things again and again. We're all aware that some of these challenges are plaguing or limiting our organization, right? So why haven't we solved them? If these problems are affecting organizations all over the world that significantly, why haven't we solved them? They must be valuable to solve. And I'd suggest that perhaps the answer is this. Here's my premise. Maybe these are not challenges, something going wrong with the way we're organizing today. Maybe our organizations are perfectly designed to achieve these results. In other words, perhaps, as we'd say in the software world, these are features, not bugs, of our current approach to organization. And what I mean by that, perhaps there's something so fundamental to the way we fundamentally structure and organize power, what I call the kind of core operating system or the core social technology underneath how we organize. The way we communicate, the way we structure, the way we share power, the way we align. Perhaps the fundamental system itself has some of these as side effects. And if that's true, it points to, I think, the magnitude of the challenge. Right? We're not going to solve these by just patching the way we work now. We're not going to be able to just take some new technique and kind of patch it on or bolt it on or apply it to at best, maybe we'll alleviate some symptoms, maybe. But we're not going to get a fundamental transformation of these issues if these issues are coming as a direct result of some of the core foundational way we structure. Perfectly designed to achieve these results. If we want to change that, we're going to have to look deeper. And that's what I call the core social technology. So what we need, I think, if we want to transcend some of these real limiting patterns that we see all over, is to look at the fundamental level of power and communication and structure. In other words, we need a new social technology. And I know we often don't think of our organizations, of the way we organize as a choice, as a technology that can be changed. But I think it is. Just like, we might not think of the operating system under our computer as a choice, but lately I'm running on a PC and I have so many colleagues on a Mac that point out every issue I have with my PC that they don't have with their Mac, and suddenly I'm realizing maybe I do have a choice in my underlying operating system. And same thing with our organizations. The way we share power, the way we organize and communicate and structure, there is the modern norm, but there's also other power structures that are possible. And one of those is holacracy. And that is the system that you all, I hope, have come here to get a taste of today. So let me share a little bit about this new social technology called holacracy. And it is first and foremost a social technology for purposeful organization. I like to think of it as an underlying operating system for a company. And by operating system, I don't mean a piece of software in this case. I mean a social operating system. And one that is all built around expressing a purpose in the world more purposefully or more consciously. So the whole operating system is grounded in purpose. What is this organization here to express in the world? What is the deepest creative capacity it has to create something of value in the world? And then how do we organize and structure everything around that? So it's a new social technology for purposeful organization. It is also, and here's the fundamental shift that makes it, I think, a new social technology, it is a new power structure. It is vested in a constitution. So one of the things you'll see on our website is the Holacracy Constitution. It is a legal document. It is a detailed legal document that defines a completely new power structure. right? A completely new way of distributing authority. Um, and I hope the magnitude of that shift it comes across at least a little here. We're not just talking about layering on some new way of meeting or some new way of working on top of the way the organization fundamentally works today. We're talking about changing the core rules of the game. The Holacracy Constitution is effectively a new rule book, right? And just like any good sport needs a good set of rules, they help us know how to all play together. The Constitution defines a new set of rules for playing this new game, this new way, right? This is such a radical shift from what we're used to in terms of the power structure Holacracy introduces. It does not look like the power structure we're used to today. In fact, one of the core shifts in this new power structure, I love this paradox, it's an integrative way to distribute autocratic authority. So what I mean by that is in this new power structure, there is a governance process that holds the ultimate power. Instead of ultimate power residing in a single leader, kind of like a feudal lord who can distribute power as they see fit, who can kind of trump and hold all of the power, a king, if you will, in the organization. Instead, the Holacracy Constitution vests the fundamental power of a company in a governance process that everyone throughout the organization contributes to. It's actually a distributed governance process, so every team is doing governance, having governance meetings, and through these new rules of the game, they're structuring and organizing how power works and how expectations are set on their team. So the irony of this, or the paradox in this, is everyone in the organization has a way to get whatever they're sensing, whatever changes they see as needed to somehow get that processed in this governance process. And yet what the governance process does is distribute autocratic authority. So this highly integrative process that everyone contributes to is used to define who needs to expect what from whom and what power do we have to go about doing the work entrusted to us. So what we end up with is a system where most decisions are still made autocratically, right? So each individual within that system, each individual in that company is going to know, here's the power I have and hold to use in service of my piece of this purpose, right? And when you have that power, no one can trump it. So more concretely, the newest partner working in our organization, running with this constitution, the newest partner who comes in, the newest member who comes in and works here, has power that I can't trump. And if I, tried to tell her, hey, I think you ought to change this decision, or I told her what to do, she would, I hope, look at me and say, wait a minute, you don't have the authority to tell me that. One of the interesting parts of my job is often reminding the CEOs we work with, wait, you don't have the authority to tell somebody what to do anymore in the same way you used to. So once this integrative governance process happens, we end up with power distributed. So everyone has power to make decisions for their piece, their role, that no one else can trump. It is sovereign responsibility and authority that goes with it. So this is one of the many paradoxes. We're not making all decisions through a group process, but through a group process, we are deciding who makes what decisions, within what limits, and what are we going to expect from them along the way. So we're using an integrative process to distribute authority. And that translates to governance and operations. So Holacracy includes tangible processes, rules of the game, and meeting processes to support them, although it's about the core fundamental power shift here, not just new ways of meeting. So all of that for governance and operations. Governance is about how we distribute the authority, the meta pattern, the who makes what decisions, how, and all that. And operations is about getting the work done, making those decisions and synchronizing and coordinating with everyone else. So that's a Holacracy in a nutshell. Let's dig deeper into some of this, and specifically focusing on the governance piece. I think there's a lot of meat here, and it's something so different than what we're used to. So we don't have time to cover everything in a short webinar, but let's at least hit some of these core shifts. As we're thinking about governing this entity, let me make another key point here. So I love the quote, "It takes a village to raise a child." I co-opted that. It takes a village to raise an organization. So what we're doing when we're governing an organization through this method, we're defining its structures, its pathways and connections. It's kind of a meta process of structuring how this organization works to express its purpose. And it's all of us, the village around this organization, if you will. We are contributing to that process. We are raising an organization. And I think one of the most powerful ways we can think of the organization here, the shift from a lot of what we're used to today, I think we're used to thinking of organizations often as about the collection of people. It's kind of the organization is the sum of the people around it. It's about all of us. And this shifts that. It says it's not a collective. Think of the organization as an individual entity, the organization. Right? Almost like a new life. It's the baby here we're raising. We, the people that are working for this organization, we're in its village, if you will. We're helping to raise it. We're helping it express its purpose in life. Much like a parent raising a child, our job is not to use it to meet our own needs. Our job is to help it, to steward it, to help it find its deepest creative gifts in the world and to express those. Not to project our needs on it, but to get our needs out of the way, to own our needs and take care of ourselves and have an adult-to-adult relationship with it, eventually, to help it, to raise it. It's a fundamental shift on how we think about organizations and how we try to use them. They're not for meeting our needs, right? Just like our children aren't our property for meeting our needs. And yet, ironically, we get our needs met pretty well as parents when we hold that boundary and we help our children find and express their gifts and be the best they can be. When we do that, we have an opportunity to have a deep, powerful relationship with our children, right? One that is fundamentally adult to adult. I think the same is true with our organization. When we have this power to steward the organization and we use it for its sake, we have a real powerful capacity and a new type of relationship that's possible. And since with Holacracy at play, we're not just talking about the privileged few that get to be part of raising this organization, while everyone else are the family servants, if you will. With Holacracy, everybody's involved in the governance, the structuring, the raising of this organization. So it's a distributed function and everybody is involved. All right, so let me tell another story here to serve as another metaphor as we look more about how we structure and govern an organization. And this is a true story. So I have a private pilot's license. And when I was first learning to fly, I had a very harrowing experience. I was up in the plane. I was doing my first cross-country solo flight. So it's the first time I'm flying with no instructor, hundreds of miles away from my home base. And I was kind of scared. I had 20-some hours of actual flight time under my belt at this point. Might seem kind of surprising, but they let you get up in a plane alone with 20-some hours of flight time and fly hundreds of miles away. So I was doing this. I'm on my first cross-country solo flight. And as I'm going along, I'm pretty nervous, and the low voltage light comes on. Right? The low voltage light on the panel comes on, and well, that's different. I didn't really know. They don't teach you much about the hardware of the plane. So what do? Well, my first instinct is, tap the low voltage light, but that doesn't change anything. So my next instinct is to check all of my other instruments, right? To look at my altimeter, which says you're not losing altitude, everything's fine. To look at my airspeed indicator, which says, well, you're not losing speed, nothing can be wrong. My navigation aid says you're perfectly on course, you're not drifting at all, everything's great. One by one, every other instrument in that dashboard tells me nothing to worry about. Yeah, there's no problem here, except the low voltage light. So what do? Well, I let the other instruments effectively outvote the low voltage light. I ignored it. I figured it must not be that big of a problem. No other instrument is reporting anything anomalous. It's just one. So it must not be that big of a deal. And I just ignored it and kept on flying. That was a terrible decision. A really terrible decision. I nearly crashed the plane that day. I nearly crashed the plane. And I learned a valuable lesson. When I got down, Who would have thought the low voltage light, it turns out, is tuned in to different information than all of the other instruments in that plane. I ignored it at my own peril. And over the many months that followed, as I reflected on this pretty scary experience, I realized I do this in my organization all the time. When I show up in an organization, all of the people that show up, we become the sensors, the instruments, right? We sense reality on behalf of that organization. We're its eyes, its ears, its fingers, and often we sense things that no one else does, right? And often we outvote the low voltage light, or the one person who senses something that no one else does. So what is that? What else can we do? Well, it's difficult right now in our current organizational structures to fully integrate and use anything that anyone senses, right? So I had a question, and this is some of the question that led to what we now call holacracy. As I held for many years the question, how can anything sensed by anyone, anywhere in the organization, have somewhere to go to get rapidly and reliably processed into meaningful change, at least to the extent it's relevant to the organization's purpose? And that's really difficult. Think of the organizations you know today. How many of the organizations that you've worked in or with can truly say that anything sensed by anyone, anywhere in the company, can get rapidly and reliably processed into some kind of meaningful change if it's relevant to the purpose, right? All of those things you listed at the beginning are in the way of this, right? You can't do this if somebody can bring their thing, which is really not about the purpose, it's about their ego, and dominate with it. And yet if somebody can dismiss somebody else's thing because they don't see it, well, that kills our ability to necessarily process things. Imagine trying to get something processed when the boss doesn't see it. If you're the low voltage light and the boss doesn't understand what you're sensing, it's very difficult in our conventional organization to get this processed, to get things processed. Right? So anything sensed by anyone needs somewhere to go to get processed if we're going to fully harness the power of our sensors, our instruments, right? If we're going to fly with all of our instruments in our organization. So how do we do that? And that's the fundamental goal as we're looking at this new power structure. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this power structure in a few minutes here. We'll walk through some of the examples of how it works. But before we do that, for this framing, consider this is the goal. Anything sensed by anyone needs somewhere to go to get processed. So we're flying with all of our instruments, if you will. And we're doing it for the purpose of the organization through a new authority structure that has a new governance process for deciding who can make what decisions, for distributing authority and what we expect from each other. So let me introduce one other distinction, and then we'll get a little more concrete. So one other distinction here. How do we sense things? This is a language that we use in Holacracy, and you'll see through the Constitution all over the place. The language is a word called tension. And when we sense things in an organization, it's often, it comes as this whole system experience, right? We often don't just sense things intellectually that could be better. What we feel is this sense of a tension whenever we feel that we're here, but we could be here. There's a gap between what is and what could be. Or we sense some potential, which is different than our current reality. Right? Whenever we have that, we sense current reality and a potential, and there's a gap, and we can hold both of those. That's what we define as a tension. Right? So the root of the word tension, tendere, from Latin, means to stretch. Right? So it's not a negative thing. I don't mean this word in a bad way. I don't mean tension as something we don't want. In fact, we do want it. We want lots of tensions. We just don't want the same ones sticking around for years because there's nowhere to process them. We want to process the tensions, to use that energy, like that rubber band stretched between 2 points, use that energy to pull what is towards what could be and clear space for the next tension to arise. Tensions power an organization if you can process them. So let's dive in and let's talk about how we do that. So there's 2 ways in Holacracy to process tensions, 2 fundamental categories. There's actually many different ways within 2 overall buckets. So in Holacracy, there's a bucket to process tensions called governance and one called operations. And it roughly equates to this. When we need to work in the organization, we need to get work done, we need to take some action or cause some change, then what we want is operations. We want to process tensions by taking some action. And when we want to work on the organization, that is to change the pattern of the way things work around here, who makes what decisions, what do we expect from each other, what constraints do we need to honor, that's the realm of governance. So two fundamental buckets to process tensions with, operations and governance. And let's look at the governance paradigm again a little bit more. And the governance process used in Holacracy, you can actually find the process description in one of the resources on our website, although it takes a little training to explain, and I'll leave you with some more resources for how you can go deeper with it at the end. When we're processing things through governance, the governance paradigms we're used to in our world are democratic governance paradigms. We're used to thinking of governance of the people, by the people, for the people, right? It was in some famous speech in American history. Governance of the people, government of the people, by the people, for the people. That is not Holacracy. That is not what this is doing. Holacracy's governance paradigm is not a democratic form of government. We don't want that. In fact, the last thing we want is 51% to be able to outvote the low voltage light, right? We want anything sensed by anyone to have somewhere to go to get processed. And it's not for our sake. We also don't want to dominate the organization with our preferences because, hey, it's democratic, right? This is what we want. Let's force it on the organization. No. In Holacracy, the governance paradigm is very different. It's not of the people, by the people, for the people. It's of the organization. What we're governing is its structure, its authority system, its expectations, governing the organization through the people as sensors. We are its instruments for the purpose. We're governing for the purpose of the organization that we're trying to help it express in the world. All right. So as we look at what this does to an organizational structure, here's some of the shifts. So there's a great distinction by an organizational theorist called Elliot Jacks, who said, you know, there's three things we can look at as structure for an organization, right? One is the formal structure. We can look at the org chart and the job descriptions, the structure that's written down on paper that we say is the structure. Now let me ask you, in the organizations you've worked in, when was the last time you ran to your job description eagerly and excitedly to get real clarity about what people needed to expect of you and what you could expect of them and what needed to be done around here? When was the last time, the last week, where you looked at your job description every day excitedly to find that clarity? I'm guessing you can't think of that time. Most organizations do not have a formal structure which is in any way reflective of what's actually needed, right? In fact, usually those job descriptions are out of date and irrelevant by the time they roll off the printer. And then they go in a drawer somewhere and we ignore them because they're often different from the actual operating structure. So they're a lie. They're not even reflective of what's really happening anyway. There's some formalized bureaucratic artifact and nothing more. So Jacks called out the extant structure, which is the one that's actually operating, not the one we say is operating on paper, but what's actually happening. Who's expecting what from whom, who's making which decisions, who's owning what, that kind of stuff. The extant structure often differs from the formal structure. And of course it does, because the formal structure doesn't capture what's really needed. So we humans, being smart and creative, we work around it. We ignore the formal structure and we go do what makes sense. And then we have cultural norms develop and we start aligning with those instead of with the formal structure. And the trouble that Jacks called out, and I think had a really great point here, is often even the structure actually operating is not truly the most natural or the one best aligned with the work. So he said there's a third structure we can look at, the requisite structure, right? The natural structure, the one that wants to be. The most natural and effective way of organizing given the nature of the work and the purpose you're trying to express. And of course, all three of these are usually quite different in most organizations. The way we're used to working and the way things work around here is rarely requisite, or we wouldn't feel tensions. In fact, when we feel tension, by my definition of tension, the gap between what is and what could be, what we're sensing is the gap between the extant structure that's actually operating and the requisite structure that could be, that would somehow help us express the purpose better. Right? So what we're sensing is those gaps. Now, what we're doing with Holacracy's governance system is processing that. So tension is the input. When we sense a tension between what is and what could be, we can process that tension by going to a governance meeting. So we show up at a governance meeting and we bring a proposal. And what we're doing in that process is aligning the output, which is our formal structure, with the requisite. So in Holacracy, in governance, we are evolving the formal structure, the one captured, the set of expectations and power, the way the organization works around here. We're evolving that, the formal captured definition of that, to be more requisite. So you can think of what we're doing here as actually an evolutionary design process. So instead of trying to design the formal structure and end up with the irrelevant job descriptions that we're used to, we are evolving it one tension at a time by facing reality, by saying, okay, what are we sensing in trying to do the work that seems not as good as it could be? What tangible data do we have about actual work situations we're running into that could be better than they are? Right? That's a tension. We're going into a governance meeting and we're processing that tension. We're changing the actual formal structure to align with what's requisite. Right? So we're evolving the design of the organization continually. This is a continual process, and it's a distributed process. Every team is doing this for their work and how they structure around their piece of this overall system. And so at the end of the day, what we get is a formal structure that's aligned with the requisite structure, which makes it trustworthy. So with Holacracy at play, we do see people running and checking their job description multiple times a day, excitedly, to get real clarity of how things need to work and what they can expect from each other and what authority they have. Because that formal structure is actually capturing that, and it's capturing the requisite. It's not just some theoretical idea that somebody, in HR wrote up and printed out. Right? It's the result of a continual process of changing the structure based on the tension sensed doing the work. So all three of these then align. We can then enact that one clearly. So our formal, our extant, and our requisite are aligned when we can process our tensions by changing the formal structure of authorities. All right, so let's see what that looks like. And when we look at the outputs of governance, so the tangible structure that we're defining through this governance process, we have three primary elements: role definitions, policies, and elections. We're going to look at the first one here. You can see the others described in our Constitution, but let's look at role definitions. This is where a lot of the meat comes in. So in the requisite structure, so how do we capture that? The outputs of governance. The output of our governance process is something that looks familiar on the surface, like a job description, but is not. First and foremost, what we're defining are roles, not jobs for a person, but roles. One individual worker might hold many roles, just like we do in real life. We fill many roles. So we're defining the fundamental roles of the organization, and we're defining what expectations are on the roles and what authority the roles hold. And because this is a constitutionally backed output, a governance process, this is real authority. So when you have a role, you gain real authority and real responsibility, and no boss is there to boss you around and tell you what to do. It's your authority and your responsibility in your roles. So let's look at one of these roles. Here's an example of a marketing role. So each role has a purpose, why it exists, what it aims to create or manifest in the world. An example of our marketing role's purpose, reveal the natural beauty of Holacracy to the world, for example. So a purpose is just, it gives you an orientation and it gives you authority. So this is giving you a sense, what am I trying to manifest or enact in this role? And when you have a role and you have a purpose, you have the authority to take any action you deem reasonably useful to express that purpose, as long as it doesn't step on another role's domain or scope. And that's actually the next component of a role. So each role has a scope or a domain, which grants control. It's effectively a property right. It's saying when you have a scope or a domain, no one else can mess with this without your permission. So if our marketing role has the scope of our public website, that's saying no other role in the system can take an action which impacts it. Not the boss, not the founder. CEO is no longer a relevant title in this system, but if it were, or if there's somebody that happens to have that just so the rest of the world knows how to deal with us, then even that person can't make an edit or a change which impacts the website without the marketing role's permission. So distributed autocratic authority. Likewise, when a role has a purpose, again, it gets the authority to take any action it needs to express that purpose, as long as it doesn't impact another role's domain without their permission. So through this, there's an interesting blend of distributed authority. We can do whatever we want. We don't have to get permission to do things as long as they don't impact another role's property. Kind of like our life in our broader societies, right? I can go do anything I want to express my purpose. But if I want to, say, use my neighbor's car, I better ask his permission before I go get his car and drive it somewhere, right? Property rights. It's bringing that into the wild frontier of our organizations and giving clarity on who can control what and when. And the last piece of a role definition are accountabilities, which also grant authority to take actions to express these activities, and they define expectations. So accountabilities says, look, if your role is going to have this purpose and control this property, we better be able to expect some things of you. So accountabilities define the expectations that others can rely on. And in Holacracy, when this is in place, if there is something not captured in your explicit roles that you fill in their accountabilities, no one has a right to expect it. So if you want the right to expect something from someone, you need to go to governance, you need to make a proposal. There's an integrative process there that gives everyone else a chance to integrate into that proposal. And we need to get clear output that says, here's an accountability of a role so you can expect it. So remember now, these role descriptions are not theoretical things that are made by some guy in HR. Rather, they're the output of our team's actual working process. The people filling these roles and doing this work together are going to governance meetings and evolving continually this authority structure. Who controls what, who expects what from whom, and what purposes do we have the authority to go out and try to serve and express. So all of this is a dynamic, living, breathing output. All right. Great. So let's look at how this scales, and then we'll come back to our Q&A. And I know there's a bunch of questions. We'll dive back through when we get to our Q&A block. So one last piece here is, so we've got this governance process where we are processing tensions into real clear distributed authority structures, roles with accountabilities, purposes, and some domains that they control. How do we scale that? Well, with Holacracy at play, we recognize that we have a bunch of roles that naturally group together. So roles fit together in what we call circles, right? So you might have a bunch of roles all related to our website, our social media, our marketing, and all together they fit into our content and outreach circle or our marketing circle, broader, bigger circle, a group. Or we have roles that deal with all our trainings. We have a training operations role, a trainer role, training design role, training business model role. All these roles relate to our training program, and they all fit together in a circle called our Holacracy training or Holacracy education circle. So these circles then themselves naturally group together. So a circle is kind of like itself a role. It's just a really big role. It has its purpose as a whole circle, and it's going to break that purpose down into its own roles, and it itself is going to be a member of a larger circle. So a great metaphor to think about this, kind of like our cells in our body, right? So we have lots of cells, and those cells are autonomous entities. They're like the lowest level circles here, right? We have circles or cells that have authority. They have their own governance and organizing process. And yet, they also are parts of our organs. And our organ doesn't destroy the autonomy of our cells. This isn't some weird power hierarchy we're talking about. It's actually an organic holarchy. It's a broadening scope or a broadening embrace. The organ still respects the autonomy of the cells, right? They have their boundaries and their own control and self-organization going on, and yet the organ integrates them. It integrates a lot of these different cells for a larger purpose. Likewise, we have circles that integrate a lot of different subcircles and ultimately a lot of different roles for some larger purpose. And this is true all the way throughout the organizational structure. So we've now shifted our structure quite a bit. This circle-based structure, or more, we're defining the cells and organs of the system. The circles themselves are the outputs of the governance process. So this is a dynamic, continuously living, breathing structure that can change at any time. Now, the last piece of this puzzle that we need a way to get to connect across cells. So in this structure, we need a way to channel tensions across a cell membrane. So in other words, if we sense a tension, if the person filling this role out here in this bigger circle senses a tension that needs to be processed inside, it needs to get channeled into a subcircle, right? We want to honor the autonomy, so we can't tell the subcircle what to do, but what we can do is send a message in, channel a message into that cell to get something into this circle so that it can process it, right? We need a link through the membrane. And vice versa. What if we sense a tension in this circle here, but it really needs to get out to the broader circle to process? It doesn't relate just to our work. It relates to something in the bigger picture. It relates to how our circle connects with this other circle, or what have you. So we also need a way to channel messages from within a circle out to the broader environment. And with Holacracy, we do that through a double linking process. So we have a lead link, which is appointed in the broader circle, from the broader circle into the subcircle. And that lead link will show up in the governance meetings of both connected circles. Similarly, we have a rep link. A rep link, or representative link, is elected from among the people working together in a circle. The rep link is elected to also sit in the broader circle to channel tensions out to that bigger picture, that broader context for processing. And the rep link will also show up in the governance meetings and the operational meetings of both connected circles. So I know that's a lot to digest and probably a bit like drinking out of a fire hose, but to sum that up altogether, we're shifting the organization structure from one that is this artificial power hierarchy with people and titles and egos and all that, to a more organic structure, not of the people. That's the other fundamental shift here. If we draw people on this diagram, we have to put them outside, right? We're not parts of this company. We are the family helping to raise it. We are energizing this organization's expression in the world, its pursuit of its purpose. So we're out here, we are energizing these roles, right? And we might energize many roles throughout the organization. We don't belong to a single circle. I hold roles in many different circles. That's not uncommon. So the organizational structure is no longer a structure of the people in this kind of hierarchical fashion. It's a structure of the work, of the organization's body, its organs, its cells, its systems, all connected together, ultimately all the way broken down to the level of an individual cell or an individual role. And that's what we are structuring and governing. And then we become the kind of spiritual life force, breathing life into these roles and energizing these roles, gaining the authorities and the responsibilities of each of the roles we fill to go express their work and to process tension. So a very different type of structure. And all of that to say, if you want to learn more, you can find a lot more on our website. This is the purpose of Holacracy 1, exquisite organization. We captured in just 2 words. And I hope I've given you at least a little taste in a whirlwind tour of a very complex system, a simple yet complex system that helps manifest exquisite organization, where anyone can process any tension they sense anywhere in the organization into meaningful change by updating and evolving a distributed authority structure that's very organic and lets each of us show up with our authority in our roles and express them for the sake of an overall purpose. So if you want to learn more, we have trainings we offer. They're a great way to dive in. Our trainings are experiential. They get more concrete. We do simulations of governance meetings and tactical meetings, so you can see the outputs of that. In our deeper training, our 5-day practitioner certification training, we actually have a deep immersive simulation where you're in an organization running with Holacracy and seeing how that all comes out and how you process stuff in that organization. You can find all those trainings listed on our website. We also help organizations adopt Holacracy, and you'll find more about that on our website as well. We have trainings coming up in the West Coast in San Francisco in March, and on the East Coast In Philadelphia, we'll have one soon scheduled for October. And then in Europe, we've got one coming up in Europe as well. You'll find all that on the web.